So, I guess to start, you went to battle in Vietnam.
Yes, I went into the United States Navy in 1965 and was assigned several tours of duty in Vietnam and got out in 1970, the end of 1970, when President Nixon began to wind the war down, and so I got to come home a little bit early.
Uh, there's a lot. I hear a lot about people didn't know what they were fighting for. Really, did you know what you were fighting for, or?
I was fighting because I was sent there by the United States government. But to answer your question probably a little bit differently, now in retrospect, it wasn't it wasn't a cause that we could win because the politicians put too many restrictions on the military because they were afraid of repercussions from the Russians and the Chinese or whatever. So towards the end, on my third tour in Vietnam, I certainly questioned why we were there, especially when, as I was over there, and some of the men that were under me got killed and wounded, and then you could see where they were demonstrating in the United States of America up and down Washington and in front of the White House with the very flag of the people that were trying to kill me and my men. So I questioned that, yeah.
What rank did you start at, and where did you end?
Well, actually, I started as an enlisted man. I was going to school and needed another year to finish getting my degree. And the Navy had a program where you could enlist in the Navy, go through boot camp and all that, which I did in San Diego, and then they gave me an extra year to finish getting my college degree, and then I went to Naval OCS, Officer Candidate School, Newport, Rhode Island, and got my commission as an ensign, which is the same thing as a second lieutenant in the Army or the Marines or whatever, and then was sent to Vietnam. Ended up as a full lieutenant.
So you enlisted. You weren't drafted.
No, that's an interesting story. In 1965, which is when the Vietnam War began to escalate, I knew I was going to be drafted. And like I say, I was married, had a house to pay for, like one more year getting my college degree. So if I didn't enlist and enter this officer program that the Navy had, then I would have been drafted. So, no, I volunteered, but because if I didn't, I knew I was going to be drafted.
Mm-hmm.
So
with you enlisting like that, how did your family feel about that?
well, of course, like I say, I was married. I got married right out of high school, and I know my wife understood that was the way it was. I wasn't going to run off to Canada like a lot of the draft dodgers did, and I was going to do whatever the country told me to do. So certainly there was trepidation and concern by my wife, and certainly I assumed my mother and father, but I didn't have any children. But yeah, we were concerned.
How and what medals did you earn during your service?
Well, let's see. Actually, I've got them upstairs in the shadow box, but I earned the Vietnamese Service Cross, which you get if you're in Vietnam for over 6 months. I received the Vietnam Campaign Medal with 4 Bronze Stars, which means for every Bronze Star, that means that you were in one of the authorized combat operations.
Mm-hmm.
And I think throughout the entire Vietnam War, it was divided up into like 17 campaigns, and so I was involved in 4 of the 17 during my time there. And then I got a Navy Commendation Medal for heroic action, or whatever you want to call it.
What experience did you have while in battle and while not in battle? As in, like, just campgrounds and stuff like that?
You know, I wasn't in the Army or the Marines, I was in the
Oh, yeah.
Navy, so we didn't actually camp out.
Mm-hmm.
That's a hard question to answer. You know, my time in riverine warfare, up and down the rivers and that sort of thing. The other tour I had was on a destroyer going up and down the coast of Vietnam, doing gunfire support for the Marines and the Army along the coast. And my last tour was as a cargo officer on an oiler, which is a tanker.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we operated out of Subic Bay Navy base in the Philippines. We would load the oiler, and I was a cargo officer, so I was responsible for taking on all of the fuel. And we would go to Vietnam and start on the southern tip, go up the coast of Vietnam and refuel the gunline supports, and we had smaller destroyer escorts that were doing market time operations, which was the interdiction of supplies coming down from North Vietnam to the southern coast, and then we would, when we finished, got up to the DMZ, which is the demarcation line between North and South Vietnam. After we'd refueled the ships on the gun line, then we went out into the Tonkin Gulf, which is called Yankee Station, and that's where our aircraft carriers were operating. And then we would refuel the aircraft carriers and the ships in the task force that were around the carriers, protecting them from air attack or submarines or whatever. So we'd refuel them, and main thing that they took then was JP4 fuel for the jet planes that were operating up into North Vietnam, and so we kept them. And then we'd go back to Subic Bay, refill, and go back right back and do the same thing over and over and over.
How did you feel when you got your discharge notice?
That's a hard question too. Obviously, thrilled to be getting out, and like I say, I got out about a year early because President Nixon had already seen that we weren't going to win that war, at least militarily. So they started the Vietnamization program, whereby we were turning over to the South Vietnamese military. So I was thrilled to be going home. I hadn't been home in 2.5 years, hadn't seen my wife in 2.5 years, so obviously I was thrilled. But I also was had reservations about coming back to the United States because, again, as I said earlier, while we were fighting, there were people, thousands of people in America demonstrating against us, the American military, and mostly because they didn't want to go to Vietnam themselves. So that's an easy way. So I was had trepidations about coming back, and sure enough, I'm one of those guys. I hadn't been back to America in 2.5 years, and when I flew into McChord Air Base, which is in California, and then from McChord, I went to San Francisco International to fly back to Dallas to get my discharge. There were people that actually spit at me because I had my uniform on with all my little medals and all that sort of thing. So yeah, I was very bitter, and it took me a while to get over that.
So the citizens didn't like you because they didn't want to go to Vietnam War and they didn't want to go to Vietnam themselves.
I assume, man, I don't
Yeah.
know, it was, you know, you weren't born, but, yeah, everybody was against the war for lots of reasons.
Mhm.
It's been going on for 10 years and a lot of American boys have been killed in it. And again, didn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to it.
Mhm.
You know, it's the politicians, for whatever reason, kind of kept the military from doing what they needed to do or whatever, but it just went on and on. Anyway, you know, if you look back in history, and I'm sure maybe your mother and father can remember, but even then, they were too young. That was way back in 1960s. So, but yeah, there was the people didn't want to be in the war, and a lot of them, like I say, I'm sure were draft dodgers,
Mhm.
but not everybody. I'm sure a lot of people had reservations against war, but it wasn't our fault, the military fault. We were sent over there. We were doing
Mhm.
what we were supposed to do, but yet, you know, we received all the backlash from it.
Yeah. How did you really deal with the way you got treated? Like,
It took me a long time to get over that. And obviously you can tell I'm not over it now. I don't think it was right. What I really like today is that all the kids that are sent over to Afghanistan and Iraq that the military is treated with the respect they deserve. And so I appreciate that, and I wish it had been that way when I came home. There were no parades or hugs
Mhm.
or welcome homes that they have now. And so perhaps, you know, that turned out to be it. What I went through or the people that served in Vietnam with me went
Mhm.
through, you know, maybe that ended up being a good thing, because people are saying, no, don't disrespect the military. The kids that are over there, they're fighting and dying. Uh, it's not because they want to be in most cases.
Mhm.
So yeah, I would say, to answer your question, it took me a long time before I was really uh, not irate about it. But as you see, I'm still not over the fact that we were treated that way.
Mhm.
But again, you go to Washington D.C., which I don't know if you have or not. You go to Washington D.C. and you see the memorial, the Vietnam Memorial, and you see the 55,000 American kids that died over there, their names on that black wall, and you see the people come by and you know, in silence and honor those kids,
Mhm.
and yeah, it makes you feel good.
Um. Well, these other two are the same thing. We already went over. Um. I guess if I need to, I can crop out me just going But
Well, or you can cut out some of the things I say.
well, these are the same things. Um. What was what was one major battle you fought in? Well, probably the biggest battle.
Oh, Vietnam was different in that there weren't any like battles like you see in
Mhm.
World War II, Battle of the Bulge and all that sort of thing.
Mhm.
It was a constant day in and day out
Oh yeah.
fight. And some days nothing would happen, and other days, again, if you were going up a river, you might be ambushed, and you might go up that same river 3 or 4 weeks in a row and not be ambushed. So there weren't any really major battles. I would say, you know, people in that you think of in Vietnam, you think of the Tet Offensive,
Mhm.
where they attacked all through South Vietnam
Mhm.
and Hue and that sort of thing. But like I say, most of the things that day-to-day operations were just day-to-day operations. Patrols were sent out into the jungles to find the enemy, and you know, when you found the enemy, usually what would happen is that there'd be a brief firefight, and then the North Vietnamese would escaped back into Laos and Cambodia, where we weren't allowed to go into. That's what I'm talking about, politicians,
Yeah.
you know, they'd attack you and hit and run and go back over. So, you know, the big battles I think of in Vietnam were like Khe Sanh, which was the Marines and the Tet Offensive. So, you know, I don't guess I was involved in any of those big battles like that, but that was the only two. Vietnam was basically a guerrilla war. It wasn't like World War II or World War One or the Korean War.
It was a continuous thing.
It was a different. It was basically a hit and run thing. They would, you know, you'd go into fights, and then the fights would last maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and then all of a sudden they were gone. And you know, it kind of got, you know, it got to where it was hard to tell who was winning, because the Marines would go and take a hill and lose, you know, a number of dead and wounded, and then turn right around the next day and leave the hill, and then the North Vietnamese would come right back. And so it was a strange war. You didn't fight for land. It was, and towards the end there, when I was at the end of it, the big thing was body count. They tried to determine who won the war or the fight by saying, okay, we killed this many, and you know, that was the big thing then, and that's not a way to fight a war.
Yeah. So you were on a gunboat going up and down the rivers. Were you like front gunner or?
Oh no, I was an officer. I was an officer. I was the boat commander, and on PBRs, the PBR. We had dual mounted 50 caliber machine guns up front, and on the back you had a 60 caliber machine gun or M60. We also had 81 millimeter mortars, and usually the crew would be 4 enlisted men, and but when you operated with more than one boat, then an officer would go, and that would be when I would go. But that was a short time thing. Most of my time was spent on that destroyer and on that oiler, which, you know, every time I got a promotion, I got assigned something different. So I went from an ensign on PBRs, I made Lieutenant JG, and went to the destroyer, and then I made lieutenant, which is like a full captain, and went to the oiler, and then I made civilian.
As a question for the class, did you get your fair share of CCR and Creedence Clearwater Revival and all that?
We did listen to that. Yeah, we sure did. Bad Moon Rising.
Well, if you want, we can go look at the medals. I'll take a picture of them and put them on the slide.
Sure.
If that's okay.
Sure.
Okay. I'll just end
Sorry,
this.
I didn't